Knutsford, England, April 25, 1944. A Tuesday afternoon at the Welcome Club, a social hall organized by local civilians to host American officers and provide some measure of warmth and normalcy in a country that has been at war for nearly 5 years. The weather outside is the particular kind of gray that England produces in late April, not raining but threatening to. The sky the color of old pewter pressing down on green countryside that seems indifferent to the catastrophic machinery of war, assembling itself across every road and airfield within 100 miles of this quiet market town. Inside the hall, 500 men in American military uniforms fill the space to its limit. They are officers, most of them, colonels and lieutenant colonels and majors who have been summoned for reasons that were described in the official orders as a morale briefing. In practice, every man in that room knows what this really is. It is a chance to see the general, to stand in the same room as the man who is about to lead them into the largest amphibious invasion in the history of warfare. To hear the voice that has become, over 4 years of this war, the closest thing the United States Army has to a force of nature wearing 3 stars. General George Smith Patton, Jr., 58 years old, 6 feet tall, 185 pounds of absolute military conviction, wrapped in a uniform that is pressed to a standard that seems to defy the practical realities of field conditions. His riding boots gleam under the hall lights with the kind of polish that requires not just effort, but a particular relationship with the concept of excellence. 2 ivory-handled pistols on his hips, 3rd Army patches, stars on his collar, that he has earned in ways that most men in this room cannot fully comprehend because they have not yet stood on the ground where he has stood and made the decisions he has made. His military record at this moment in the war is not merely impressive, it is singular. He commanded the Western Task Force that landed in Morocco in November 1942 and gave the Allies their first foothold in North Africa. He took command of the shattered Second Corps after the disaster at Kasserine Pass in February 1943 and rebuilt it into a fighting force in 30 days. He led 7th Army through the conquest of Sicily in 38 days, a campaign military historians are already calling one of the fastest armored advances in the history of modern warfare. He is the general the Germans fear most, the commander whose name appears in enemy intelligence documents with a frequency and a tone of professional respect that his own side's press has not fully understood yet. He is also the general who is under a cloud. 7 months earlier, in 2 separate incidents in Sicily, he slapped enlisted men who were hospitalized for what medical staff had diagnosed as combat exhaustion. The incidents became public through newspaper reporting. The outrage in the United States was substantial. General Eisenhower, his superior and his friend, forced him to issue public apologies to the men involved and to the units who witnessed the incidents. The press declared his career finished. Several senators called for his court-martial. There are men in this hall today who privately believe they are looking at a general who has already fought his last campaign. Patton walks to the front of the room without ceremony. No introduction is made. None is needed. The 500 men in the room come to attention when he enters, and the sound of 500 men coming to attention simultaneously in an enclosed space is its own kind of announcement. He stands behind the wooden podium and looks out at the room for 3 full seconds without speaking, which in a room this charged feels considerably longer. His eyes move across the faces with the speed and precision of a man who has spent a lifetime studying large groups of men and extracting from the aggregate the information he needs in seconds. Then he speaks. His voice is not what most people expect the first time they hear it. The legends of Patton's battlefield oratory describe thunder. What they actually encounter is something more interesting than thunder. His voice is high for a man his size, almost reedy, with a quality that forces listeners to lean slightly toward it rather than receiving it passively. This creates, without any theatrical intention on his part, a dynamic in which rooms of hundreds of men collectively lean forward to hear him, which produces exactly the opposite of distance. It produces intimacy at scale, the sense that he is talking to each man individually rather than addressing a formation. He tells them they are going to win this war, not in the soft, encouraging language of a politician, in the flat, declarative language of a man announcing a fact. He tells them that the Germans they are about to face are good soldiers who will fight hard and die well, and that they will die in larger numbers than the men in this room, because the men in this room are better trained, better equipped, and led by officers who understand warfare at a level the German High Command has consistently underestimated about the American military. He tells them he does not want heroes, he wants professionals. He tells them the difference between a hero and a professional is that a hero improvises when things go wrong, and a professional has already thought through what will go wrong and prepared for it before it happens. He is 15 minutes into the speech when Colonel Archer Beaumont stands up. Beaumont is 44 years old, commanding officer of an armored regiment that has been in England for 8 months without seeing action. He is a West Point graduate, class of 1922, with an unblemished service record and a reputation within his unit as a technically competent officer and a difficult man to work for. He is standing in the 4th row from the front, which means that when he rises to his full height, Patton can see him clearly, and every man in the room can see that Patton can see him. The act of standing while a general is speaking is not a casual gesture in military culture, it is a statement. The room understands this immediately, and the room goes very still in the way of spaces where something is about to happen that cannot be predicted back to its prior state. Beaumont says, with a clarity that carries to the back of the hall, that he respectfully disagrees with the general's characterization of German command capability. He says that in his assessment, based on the after-action reports he has studied from the North Africa and Sicily campaigns, the German officer corps has demonstrated a consistent capacity for tactical adaptation that the American command structure has been slow to recognize and slower to match. He says that overconfidence at the command level is the single most dangerous variable in the coming operation, and that he would be failing his duty if he did not say so publicly. He sits down. The silence that follows lasts approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds in which 500 officers calculate simultaneously what they have just witnessed, what it means, and what will happen next. A colonel has stood up during a speech by a 3-star general and delivered a direct public criticism of that general's strategic analysis. This does not happen. This is not something that happens in the United States Army in April of 1944. It is the kind of thing that people describe afterward by saying they were in the room but could not quite believe they were in the room. Patton looks at Beaumont for those 4 seconds. His expression does not change. He does not show surprise. He does not show anger. He shows nothing at all, which the men closest to him will later describe as more unnerving than any display of fury would have been, because fury can be anticipated and measured, and it passes. What Patton's face shows in those 4 seconds is the particular blankness of a man categorizing something with complete precision before deciding what to do with it. Then he speaks. He does not raise his voice. He does not change his posture behind the podium. He addresses the room, not Beaumont specifically, which is important, because addressing the room means that what he is about to say belongs to everyone present, not to an exchange between 2 men. He says that the colonel has raised 2 points and that both of them deserve a response. He says the first point, about German tactical adaptation, is correct. He says it without qualification, without the slightest suggestion that a subordinate has surprised him by being right about something. He says the German officer corps, particularly at the battalion and regimental level, has demonstrated throughout this war a capacity for rapid tactical adjustment that should command professional respect, and that any American officer who does not carry that respect into the coming operation will get men killed through negligence dressed as confidence. He says he agrees with the colonel on this point completely. The room processes this. Patton has just publicly agreed with a subordinate who challenged him in front of 500 men. This is also not something that happens in the United States Army. Then he says that the colonel's second point, about overconfidence at the command level, deserves a more specific response. He says that confidence and overconfidence are not the same thing, and that confusing them is a mistake that costs armies battles. He says confidence is the product of preparation, of understanding your enemy honestly, of knowing your own capabilities without self-deception, of having planned for failure so thoroughly that failure becomes simply another condition you have already accounted for. Overconfidence is what happens when men stop asking hard questions because they have confused the feeling of certainty with the reality of preparation. He says he has spent the last 8 months asking himself the hardest questions he knows how to ask about this operation. He says he has deliberately surrounded himself with officers who will tell him when his plans are wrong, rather than officers who tell him his plans are correct because they understand what he wants to hear. He says that the willingness to hear disagreement in private is the exact quality that distinguishes a command that will eventually be right from a command that will eventually be catastrophic. And then he says the following, and the men in that room will repeat these words for the rest of their lives. He says that the colonel is right to speak. He says that an officer who sees something wrong and does not say so because the room is large and the person at the front of it outranks him is not an officer who will be useful to the United States Army when the moment of actual crisis arrives. He says that the soldiers these men command deserve officers who have the professional courage to be wrong in public, because the officers who are willing to be wrong in public are the only ones who are ever genuinely right when it counts. He pauses, and then he looks directly at Beaumont for the first time since acknowledging his challenge. He says that, however, there is a distinction between the courage to disagree and the manner of disagreement, and that the manner chosen by the colonel this afternoon was the manner of a man who wanted to be seen being courageous rather than a man who was simply being courageous. He says that a genuinely courageous officer would have brought his concerns through the appropriate channels before this meeting, where they could have been examined, tested, and either incorporated into the planning or discarded after honest examination. He says that choosing to raise those concerns for the first time in front of 500 witnesses is not a display of professional courage. It is a display of something more complicated than courage, and that he will leave it to the colonel and to the men in this room to determine what that something is. He returns his gaze to the general audience and continues his speech as if nothing has been interrupted. What happens to Colonel Beaumont in the weeks that follow is not spectacular by the standards of military consequence. He is not court-martialed. He is not publicly humiliated beyond what the room has already witnessed. He is transferred. Within 10 days of the incident at the Welcome Club, his regiment is reassigned, and he is replaced by a lieutenant colonel recently promoted, who has none of his experience and all of the operational skill that the position requires. Beaumont is moved to a staff position in a logistics command, where his abilities for after-action analysis are applied to supply chain problems that have no relationship to the armored combat he spent his career preparing to lead. He will not see action in the European theater. His regiment will cross into France in July, will fight through Brittany and Alsace, will be part of the relief of Bastogne in December. He will read the dispatches from a desk in England and from a desk in Le Mans after the breakout, and he will do his job well, and he will receive no citations and no decorations and no moment of the kind that defines a military career as something more than competent service. In private correspondence discovered after his death in 1971, he will write about that afternoon in Knutsford in a way that is neither self-pitying nor bitter. He will write that Patton was correct on both counts, that his analysis of the German officer corps was accurate, and that Patton's agreement with it, delivered without defensiveness or condescension, demonstrated exactly the kind of command intelligence that makes a general genuinely dangerous to the enemy, rather than simply impressive to his own side, and that his manner of raising the concern was shaped less by professional conviction than by something he was not proud of. A desire to be the man who said the thing in front of 500 witnesses, which is a different thing entirely from the desire to be right. The Third Army crosses into France on August 1, 1944. Over the following 9 months, under Patton's command, it advances further and faster than any army in the history of Western warfare. It liberates more territory, takes more prisoners, and suffers fewer casualties per mile advanced than any comparable force on either side of the conflict. The operational record is unprecedented. The speed of the advance through France in August 1944 remains, 80 years later, a standard against which armored operations are measured in military academies on several continents, none of which began on the beaches of Normandy or on the roads of Brittany, all of which began in rooms like the Welcome Club in Knutsford, where a general stood in front of 500 men and said things that were difficult to say and true to hear, and where a colonel stood up and said something true in a way that was shaped by something less than truth, and where Patton showed that the distance between the two is not always obvious to the person standing at the front of the room, but is always obvious to the 500 people watching. In the years after the war, veterans who were present in Knutsford that afternoon are occasionally asked what they remember most about the speech. Most of them give the expected answers: the language, the certainty, the presence of the man at the podium. But a few of them, the ones who have thought about it longest, give a different answer. They say what they remember most is the 4 seconds of silence, the 4 seconds between the colonel sitting down and Patton beginning to speak, the 4 seconds in which 500 men in a room held their breath and understood that whatever happened next was going to teach them something about leadership that no training manual had ever managed to articulate. They were right. It did.